For 9 years in a row, Valerie Bertinelli grinned on television. But nobody noticed that she was living someone else's life. But she was collapsing behind closed doors. By the age of 20, she had married a man who was constantly cheating and high on cocaine during their wedding. In order to film her shows, she used caffeine pills. She was referred to as worthless by her second spouse. She eventually broke at 64. She gave up drinking, stopped weighing herself, and authored a book in which she exposed all of the lies. You never know who the girl next door is. On April 23, 1960, Valerie Bertinelli was born in Wilmington, Delaware. But her family had already experienced sorrow before she had even breathed. 2 years prior to Valerie's birth, her older brother Mark drowned when he was just 17 months old. Andrew and Nancy, her parents, never fully recovered. A child Valerie never met cast a shadow over her as she grew up. Her mother developed a safety obsession. Valerie was shielded like glass, not merely watched. Her mother's hands are always on her, never letting go, even in old family pictures. Valerie lived with the pressure to be flawless every day, even though she had no idea why. It influenced her life in ways that were invisible to others, and she subsequently discovered that psychologists refer to it as being a replacement child. The family didn't spend much time in one location. They relocated 8 times in 4 different states between Valerie's birth and her 15th birthday. Every promotion her father received at General Motors meant moving to a new city. Los Angeles, followed by Oklahoma City, Pontiac, Wilmington, California, and then back to Michigan. Valerie never spent more than a year and a half at one school. She gained the ability to blend in more quickly, make friends more quickly, and adapt to any crowd she found herself in. She then dubbed it her chameleon complex, altering who she is to fit in with those around her. Her greatest strength as an actress was what began as a survival strategy. Because she had been playing parts throughout her life, she didn't just play them, she became them. On July 26, 1972, everything drastically changed. Valerie was 12 years old. Because it cost $50, which her dad felt was a waste of money, her mom nearly skipped the Little Talent event that day. Nevertheless, they went. Wearing a $12 Woolworth's dress, Valerie performed I Don't Know How to Love Him. Out of 347 children, she was the 47th performer. There was something odd about her appearance and voice. A casting director in the audience, Ruth Birch, noticed it right away. According to her, Valerie had an older soul. Valerie's mother was approached by 3 scouts that evening, but Birch was the one who signed her. Over $40 million in career earnings resulted from just $50 event. It may have been the greatest investment in the history of show business. Valerie got the part that would make her famous just 3 years later. But she lied to acquire it. She tried out for one day at a time on March 15, 1975. She claimed to be 16, but she was still 15. Even her birth certificate was a fabrication. Why? Because 16-year-olds are permitted to work longer hours without a full-time instructor under California's labor rules. She realized that the only way to get the treatment she desired, like the older girls, was to circumvent the system. It was effective for 73 days. After then, a production assistant noticed an inconsistency in her academic records. Valerie finally opened up and spoke the truth. She was not fired by the show's creator, Norman Lear. He was impressed. He described her as bold, intelligent, and prepared. However, the deception cost them more than $127,000 in union and court fines. That sum was taken directly from Valerie's future earnings. Lear saw more than simply Valerie's talent. He recognized it. He urged her to appear as though her character's parents were divorcing during her last screen test on March 22. She began to cry, real tears. Nobody was aware that at the time, her own parents were privately thinking about getting a divorce. Something in her seemed shattered to Lear, who recognized it from his own early years. She had the same ghostly appearance that he had seen in the mirror as a child, he wrote later. A peculiar connection was formed between them at that instant. Lear grew unduly defensive. She was perceived by several cast members as receiving preferential treatment. It wasn't favoritism, though, it was acknowledgement. She reminded him of himself. Valerie was only 15 when the show debuted in December 1975. She rose to become one of television's youngest lead actresses. Valerie was earning hundreds per episode, while other children were doing summer jobs for $2.10 an hour. For prom outfits, most teenagers saved money. Fans from all around the nation were sending Valerie fan mail. Freedom, however, was not renown. It was a cage. From 1975 to 1984, she was Barbara Cooper for 9 years. Additionally, Barbara Cooper was consistently happy, resilient, and flawless. Both on and off film, Valerie had to portray that character. She felt more and more ensnared by the character that everyone else adored as the show gained popularity. The show was hefty behind the scenes. It addressed divorce, financial difficulties, loneliness, and other issues that deeply affected Valerie. She was indeed going through those difficulties. She had to grin on film despite her family's quiet disintegration. She was forced into emotional territory she didn't fully comprehend with each episode. Nevertheless, she had no choice except to deliver. Bonnie Franklin, her co-star, took on the role of a second mother. However, it wasn't always simple. Franklin kept a close eye on Valerie. Her clothing, her weight, and even her lovers. Valerie was unable to rebel like a typical adolescent. She couldn't afford to make a mistake in public. Franklin sent her to treatment when she eventually confided in him that she felt like she was crumbling. Yes, it was chilly, but it was also caring. They treated Valerie's breakdowns like production set issues. Not really personal, but fixable and manageable. Another casualty was her schooling. According to California law, child actors are only needed to attend school for 3 hours every day. Valerie received the bare minimum. She missed graduation, prom, and all the things that teens take for granted. Valerie was memorizing scripts and posing for cameras while her pals were learning how to drive and chatting in the hallways. She didn't have the life of a teenager for 9 years. She led the life of a television character. She also had to retrain herself to be authentic when the show finished. She was wealthy by her late teens, but she didn't feel liberated. Barbara Cooper was content, not Valerie Bertinelli. Every paycheck served as a reminder to her that the public adored the person she was posing as. She also became increasingly disconnected from her true self the longer it persisted. Her love tale came next. August 1980 was the beginning of it all. At the age of 20, Valerie Bertinelli was already well known for her program One Day at a Time. At the age of 25, Eddie Van Halen was a ferocious guitarist who was lighting up rock venues all across the nation. Backstage at a Van Halen show in Shreveport, Louisiana, they got to know one another. When Eddie saw Valerie, he stopped talking to someone else in the middle of his sentence. He abruptly ended the chat and approached her directly. For months he had kept a clipping of her from a magazine in his wallet. He often declared to his bandmates that he will wed that girl. It turns out that he had previously attempted to sneak backstage at her TV tapings. However, security rejected him. Eddie was so anxious and high on cocaine that he could hardly talk when they eventually met. He had trembling hands. He continued to touch his nose. He was still able to ask her out. Not everything was love at first sight. It was the culmination of obsession. It was not an ordinary first date. They stayed till 10 o'clock after meeting at a coffee shop in West Hollywood at 2 o'clock. 8 hours. Most of the talking was done by Eddie. He confessed everything, drank cup after cup of coffee, and chain-smoked. He informed her that he had been enjoying her images in TV Guide for more than a year. He talked of having specific fantasies about their future, including where they would reside and the number of children they would have. He even acknowledged using cocaine to relax just before they met. Valerie couldn't decide if she should be flattered, laugh, or run. She had never been so much in demand. The guitar then appeared. Before they had even met, Eddie had written a song about her and performed it on a small acoustic. He sung about how she made him feel alive and about her smile. It was too much. Only 8 months later, in April 1981, Eddie made the proposal. He purchased a personalized diamond ring in the shape of a guitar pick for $25,000. But there was anarchy behind the gesture. It had been 3 days since he had slept. He was paranoid and high. Before he got on his knees, he made Valerie check all the windows and doors. More than an hour was spent on the suggestion. Eddie kept trying to dismantle them with bizarre tirades about the music business and malevolent forces. Even worse, he was unable to select a single ring. He instructed her to choose the one that spoke to her soul out of the 3 he had purchased. It was not romantic. It was unsettling. On April 11, 1981, they were married in a large Westwood church. Stars everywhere, 400 guests. Over $100,000 was spent on the event, or about $350,000 now. However, the fairy tale quickly fell apart. Eddie couldn't recall his vows since he was so inebriated. He had to use a crumpled piece of paper to read them. Later, Valerie said that she almost left the ceremony in the middle. Eddie then said something in a whisper that broke her heart during their first dance. Before he walked down the aisle, he told her that he had just used cocaine in the church restroom. He then inquired if she would like some as well. She might be seen grinning in their wedding pictures. It wasn't joy, though. It was a shock. The honeymoon was just 4 days long. They traveled to Hawaii by air. Valerie had dreamed of sunsets and walks on the beach. Rather, Eddie was either locked in the restroom or passed out most of the time. His guitar case contained more than $3,000 worth of cocaine that he had smuggled. Valerie discovered him unconscious and with a bleeding nose on the 3rd day. She needed to make a hotel security call. He accused her of adultery with hotel personnel once he regained consciousness. About conspiracies, he yelled. He was hostile and paranoid. She discovered then that he had been using cocaine daily for more than 2 years prior to their first encounter. She fell in love with a fake man.
He was the drug-shaped variant. The following 20 years were turbulent. Eddie's addiction continued to deteriorate. He frequently used narcotics, smoked and drank. Valerie made an effort to assist. She made an effort to comprehend, but to no avail. She was collapsing in privacy. She once remarked, "I never hated him, but I hated the drugs and the alcohol. I could see his suffering." When they got married, she was only 21. The emotional burden of loving an addict was too much for her to handle. Eddie cheated too. The marriage began to fall apart. Since then, Valerie has acknowledged that she mentally rewrote their past after Eddie passed away, gave it a more romantic sound than it actually had. However, the truth continued surfacing. She claimed that there was only chaos and no true love, caring, or support. At the height of Eddie's addiction, they lost a pregnancy. Their pain was compounded by their grief. In 1991, Wolfgang, their son, was born. However, their relationship was already severely damaged by that point. On her own, Valerie struggled. Her career came to a standstill in 1984 after One Day at a Time finished. She had 2 sitcoms, Sydney and Café American, which were abruptly cancelled, and she appeared in a few modest TV films. She accepted any roles that came her way for years. Things became more difficult once she and Eddie split up in 2001. She made no requests for child support or alimony. They just decided to split Wolfgang's expenses. But she was quickly running out of money. Jobs were hard to come by while she was in her 40s. She then started representing Jenny Craig as a spokesperson. It was more than just weight loss. It was a matter of survival. Valerie struggled with more than money behind closed doors. Her sense of value was destroyed. "I always thought I was unlovable if I put on weight," she once commented. Deep wounds had been caused by living with someone who was intoxicated and missing all the time. She seldom ever thought well of herself. Despite being worn out on the inside, she continued to smile for the cameras. Valerie started to confront the reality when Eddie passed away in 2020. She acknowledged that despite their public persona, they led a very private life. The wild rocker and America's sweetheart were portrayed by the media as complete opposites. However, neither of them was who they appeared to be. Despite their best efforts, the grief was evident everywhere. Later on, Valerie acknowledged that she held on to the hope of their marriage for too long. Years passed before it became apparent that it had been poisonous from the beginning. When Valerie Bertinelli entered the Hot in Cleveland audition room, she was 50 years old. Since Touched by an Angel concluded in 2003, she had not appeared on a television program on a regular basis. It had been 7 long years. She was being asked to carry a new comedy series alongside Betty White, no less, after the offers had dried up and the attention had dimmed. A living legend with more than 60 years of experience, Betty was 88 years old. Valerie felt frightened. Before filming, she spent nights awake, fearing that she had lost her edge, her spark, and her timing. She was often rehearsing, sometimes again recording her words to get one chuckle right. She felt sick to her stomach at the idea of making a mistake in front of Betty White. The show then debuted on June 16, 2010. Not only did Hot in Cleveland endure, it took off. Each show drew around 2.5 million viewers. Those were numbers TV Land had never seen before. Valerie returned abruptly, but her nerves remained uneasy despite her triumph. The stakes were merely increased. Valerie was viewed as the mentor, despite
Betty being the eldest cast member. Producers relied on her as the seasoned individual to establish the mood. Valerie had the longest resume, but Jane Leeves and Wendy Malick completed the core cast. She should have felt more confidence because of that. Rather, it broke her. Between scenes, she would disappear, hiding in her trailer and writing in her journal as she attempted to control the waves of panic episodes. She was 2 hours early for every table read, with scripts in hand, lines committed to memory, and everything practiced. For even a moment, she did not want to be caught off guard. The show was renewed for a second season just 2 months after its debut. The news should have been positive. However, Valerie only experienced pressure. More episodes, more people watching her, and more opportunities to fail. There were 23 episodes in the first season, and that was only the start. At that moment, an unforeseen event occurred. She got to know a man named Tom Vitale. It was the end of 2010. Valerie had just returned from a grueling 14-hour day of filming. To relax and eat by herself, she headed to Wolfie Cohen's Rascal House in Aventura, Florida. Tom went to greet her after noticing that she was sitting alone. He was not a Hollywood star. He worked in finance and was 44 years old, 6 years Valerie's junior. He was single. He was just interested in her, not in fame. 5 days later, they went on their first date. After 3 weeks, they couldn't be separated. Tom stood for all that her background did not. No drama, stability, and peace. Tom brought peace after a lifetime of tumultuous relationships and a 2007 divorce from Eddie Van Halen. They were already discussing marriage by Christmas. For what reason would you destroy someone you once loved? Thus, all of the love you two formerly shared is nullified. Valerie and Tom were married in Malibu on January 1, 2011. Only 100 people. Compact, uncomplicated, and silent. In stark contrast to her first wedding, which drew 300 guests and was a famous occasion. This time, she donned an off-the-rack garment that cost $800. No publicity, no designer. Eddie Van Halen and Wolfgang, their son, also attended. Although everyone grinned, Valerie later acknowledged that the ceremony felt hurried. It had only taken her 6 weeks to plan. She didn't want to think too much about it. All she needed was a normal feeling. She desired to feel at ease. This time, she wanted to show that she could do it correctly. Life did not slow down, however. It became more difficult, if anything. The schedule was harsh, and the second season of Hot in Cleveland was well underway. The majority of the days began before dawn. By 5:30 a.m., Valerie needed to be on set. She refused to go till 10 o'clock at night. There were far more episodes than she was accustomed to, between 20 and 23 per season. Coffee wasn't giving her the energy she needed anymore. She then started taking caffeine tablets, between 400 and 600 milligrams daily. It would be equivalent to consuming 6 strong glasses of coffee. Red Bull and Monster, 2 energy beverages followed. Occasionally, 4 cans in a single day. Next, Adderall. It was initially recommended to aid in her concentration. It quickly turned into her crutch though. She depended on it to get through scenes, be witty, and remain sharp. Nobody was aware. She concealed everything. To keep her trailer stocked, her aide was instructed. In order to peak at the ideal time for filming, she carefully planned when to take the pills and when to consume the energy drinks. It was successful. She had perfect timing. Her jokes were spot on. But she was aware of the reality. Under strain and with the help of medications, she was striving not to break. On August 8, 2015, Valerie Bertinelli's reputation as a popular sitcom performer started to change. The launch of Valerie's home cooking at that time signaled the start of an unexpected new phase in her life. The experiment was not limited to a single season. The popular program ran for 14 seasons and 157 episodes. In the same year she began co-hosting the Kids Baking Championship alongside Duff Goldman. Was more than simply an actress all of a sudden. She frequently appeared on Food Network. Along with that came a sizable salary up to $750,000 annually just for hosting. Her cozy, intimate approach to Valerie's home cooking transported viewers to her kitchen. She prepared meals for her family and guests. She opened up, laughed, and smiled. It worked because it seemed authentic. She even won 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for the show. However, things had begun to shift by 2022. Priorities changed after Food Network and Warner Media merged. Cooking demonstrations were educational. Competition shows with high stakes were in. The adjustment did not sit well with Valerie. "I miss the days when the network taught people how to cook," she remarked on the internet. She claimed that it no longer seemed to be about learning. Valerie's home cuisine was discontinued by 2023. The show that had given her a fresh start abruptly ended. Valerie's private life was collapsing behind the scenes. After starting in 2011, her marriage to Tom Vitale had become poisonous. She later claimed that he was emotionally abusive and possessed narcissistic tendencies. She filed for divorce in May 2022. Tom retaliated by requesting $50,000 per month in support and attempting to nullify their prenuptial agreement. She continued to film Kids Baking Championship at the same time. She referred to that time frame as the apex year of hell. Despite the 8 agonizing months, she persisted. She arrived at work grinning on camera, but off-screen she sobbed softly. Finalization of the divorce took place in November 2022. Earlier that year, Valerie gave Tom $2.2 million plus an additional $500,000. She said on social media that it was the second best day of her life after it was over. She spoke honestly and uncooked. Despite being crushed, she emerged stronger. She claimed that over that time she had discovered more about her own resilience, forbearance, and value. Valerie was fighting a silent battle despite earning millions of dollars. Since childhood, she has had a distorted connection with food. She was once told to watch that by a 5th-grade teacher who prodded her belly. That stayed with her. She later acknowledged starving herself and exercising twice a day when she was hired as a Jenny Craig representative. She had had enough by her 60s. She started to completely reject diet culture and stopped weighing herself. "This is a 150-pound physique on a 5'4" frame," she wrote in 2023. "I no longer weigh myself." The charts didn't matter to her. Peace was what she desired. This new way of thinking was reflected in her 2024 cookbook Indulgence. It was about not being afraid of food but rather enjoying it. She had a bad ending to her time with Food Network. She made a new contract in December 2021. However, she was eliminated from the Kids Baking Championship in January 2024, a year later. According to some, her team's request for funds was excessive. Others said she never received an offer from the network. She was out, and it hurt, in any case. She once claimed that during her divorce the show saved her life. It was like losing a lifeline when I lost it. The Food Network was different. Valerie missed the era of cooking educational television programs like Ina Garten and Rachel Ray. However, the new bosses desired fast-paced competitions, drama, and excitement. Then she experienced the unexpected grief. On October 6, 2020, her ex-husband Eddie Van Halen, who was the father of her son Wolfgang, passed away. He was only 65. Eddie's brother and second wife, as well as Wolfgang and Valerie, had been with him every day in the hospital. Wolfgang informed her over the phone that morning that his breathing had changed. She went to the hospital right away. "I love you," was Eddie's final statement. To Valerie and to Wolfgang. Then he vanished. She couldn't describe how much the loss affected her. She was even attacked online by those who said she was mourning too much for her ex. She acknowledged, however, that she had romanticized their history. She felt as though she had lost her soulmate despite the fact that the marriage had been filled with agony, drugs, and infidelity. It was a cruel divorce from Tom Vitale. Valerie claims that they separated in 2019 after meeting in 2004 and getting married in 2011. According to Tom, it was 2021. In court, that time frame was important. The proceeds from Valerie's 2022 best-selling memoir, Enough Already, were used to support the legal battle. Tom disputed their prenuptial agreement. He desired spousal assistance. Valerie refused to give up. She later claimed that she stayed too long in both of her marriages, not just this one. She thought that if she loved deeply enough, it would be sufficient. No, it wasn't. The suffering didn't end there. Her father, Andrew, passed away in 2016. He was a consultant who assisted in the construction of the Channel Tunnel, a General Motors engineer, an Army veteran, and a good man. However, he began experiencing mild heart attacks around 2014. Then, when he was already in a doctor's office, a massive one struck. He then went into assisted living with Valerie's mother. A series of losses started with Andrew's passing. Valerie's loved ones continued to die. The sorrow simply accumulated. As if it weren't enough, she suffered greatly during menopause. It began at age 56 and continued for about 10 years. The symptoms were severe. She now chuckles about the bloopers she made on Hot in Cleveland since she was so distracted that she forgot lines. At the moment, though, it wasn't humorous. She had never experienced such intense emotional crashes. She is 64 years old and still feels unrecognizable. She once questioned her physician about her mental health. "I don't know," the doctor answered. That response was ineffective. But it helped her realize that she wasn't by herself. She started having candid conversations with other women in the hopes that her candor would make someone else feel less isolated. For decades, Valerie Bertinelli had persuaded everyone that her life was picture perfect. Married to rock icon Eddie Van Halen, she was America's sweetheart, grinning on red carpets, marketing diet plans, and making appearances on magazine covers. However, everything changed in 2022. That image was brutally shattered by her memoir, Enough Already. She said that although she had fell in love with Eddie when she was only 20, their relationship swiftly descended into an alcohol, drug, and infidelity quagmire. She held on to the delusion that they were soulmates for years. She even acknowledged that, in her imagination, she had made their marriage into a fantasy that was far different from the reality. Despite their 2007 divorce, Valerie continued to act as though nothing had changed. Even though they hadn't lived together for 20 years, she was still so engrossed in that old fantasy when Eddie passed away in 2020 that she put herself in the shoes of the distraught widow. The fans were taken aback. She remained married to a man who made her feel unwelcome for 25 years. Nevertheless, she portrayed herself as the contented wife in public. Readers were struck hard by that degree of unadulterated vulnerability. It wasn't just another tell-all about celebrities. It was an agonizing examination of how denial, addiction, and celebrity can distort reality. If that wasn't enough, Valerie went one step farther and abandoned her weight, which had been a defining characteristic of her for years. Nearly everyone was taken aback by her decision at the age of 64. She stopped dieting. She ceased weighing herself. She gave up trying to find the ideal number. This came from a woman who had worked as a spokesman for Jenny Craig, appeared on national television in a bikini at the age of 48, and shed 50 pounds to appear on the cover of People magazine in 2009. However, she had been caught in a vicious cycle of constraint and fixation behind the scenes. She repeatedly attempted to shed the same 10 pounds. Something changed when she finished writing her memoir. She claimed that her mental health improved practically immediately after she stopped using the scale. She discovered that her years of dieting had not made her feel at peace. She gave up drinking and participated in Dry January in 2023. Naturally, the weight began to drop, but she had lost interest in that. She shed between 30 and 40 pounds by 2025, not by dieting but through healing.
When she stopped worrying about figures and began paying attention to her body, she demonstrated that real change had occurred.